The basement air held a brittle December chill as investigators finally pried open the long-sealed storage trunk, dust lifting like frost in a breathless room. Inside, beneath neatly folded holiday linens, lay the forgotten evidence box that would unravel a Christmas disappearance buried in 20 years of silence this winter. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. The winter of 1999 in Cincinnati was dark even by Midwestern standards, with an early freeze shadowing the neighborhoods along the Ohio River. Holiday displays blinked in the windows of brick homes, department store speakers cycled relentless carols, and churches prepared for midnight mass as the city eased into Christmas week. Yet beneath the sleigh bells and shopping crowds, one family on the west side held quiet panic. 22-year-old University of Cincinnati junior, Eliza Hart, had failed to arrive for her family's traditional Christmas Eve dinner. She had promised to bring cranberry cake and her newly printed semester photos, and she had never missed a holiday gathering. When she did not show, her mother simply set aside her plate, believing traffic or winter fog had delayed her. By midnight, when the telephone remained silent, the family understood that something else entirely was underway. Cincinnati police opened a missing person file on December 26, citing last known location as her off-campus apartment on Clifton Avenue. Her green Saturn sedan was parked neatly in its assigned spot, still holding a snow-dusted windshield, undisturbed. The front door bore no sign of forced entry, and her keys and purse were gone. The apartment heat was on low, a bowl of wrapped cookie gifts sat on the counter, and her calendar had holiday notes written in red marker. Christmas Eve at home, New Year's brunch with friends, winter break volunteering at the community food drive. Investigators observed no clear indication of flight, stress, or conflict. Though social circles confirmed her as reliable and calm, the tone of early police interviews stayed measured, without speculation. Local news soon picked up the case, partly driven by the season when national coverage favored heartwarming family returns and volunteer efforts rather than unexplained disappearances. Flyers with her winter portrait, blue coat, tan scarf, a shy expression, were taped to bus stops, grocery store windows, and the doors of parishes preparing for midnight liturgies. The cold tightened its grip after New Year's, snow burying sidewalks, and the city moved on, but the Hart family did not. The case entered the quiet classification common to late 90s investigations. Limited digital records, no cell phone tracking, no traffic cameras beyond a few downtown banks, and storage of evidence in simple paper files. 2 decades passed. The apartment building transitioned ownership 3 times, students came and went, and the basement where seasonal items and landlord boxes were stored was rarely visited. In late 2019, during pre-Christmas renovations, a building inspector noticed a water leak behind a drywall panel. The removal led to the forgotten trunk, and in that trunk lay the early evidence compiled when the lead detective retired: Polaroids, phone logs, negatives, and a sealed envelope labeled with the case number. In accordance with protocol, all materials were transferred to the cold case unit at Hamilton County. What made the rediscovery significant was timing. Forensic technology in 1999 was rudimentary, particularly in mitochondrial analysis and touch DNA. By 2019, even minimal cellular fragments on fabric fibers could be examined with far higher resolution. Among the rediscovered materials was a Christmas card envelope, addressed in blue ink to Eliza, found during the original apartment search, but never processed due to limited laboratory capacity. The card had been cataloged but not analyzed. Resources had focused on witness canvassing and local terrain searches back then, not trace correspondence. The handwriting on the card matched a familiar name from her social circle: Andrew Carlisle, a former classmate and close friend who attended their winter study sessions and Thanksgiving leftovers gatherings. He had provided interviews in 2000, describing her as kind, academically focused, and excited for her holiday break. At the time, nothing pointed specifically to him. There had been no known conflict, and his alibi for Christmas Eve placed him at his uncle's extended family party in northern Kentucky. The 2019 forensic test on the envelope flap revealed partial DNA consistent with Carlisle. This alone was not unusual. Friends often licked envelopes before sealing. However, fibers stuck beneath the flap bore microscopic traces of artificial pine needle glitter, the same variety recorded in photos of Eliza's apartment holiday decor. The glitter match seemed minor, yet context mattered. Carlisle had said he had not been to her apartment for at least 2 weeks prior to her disappearance. Cold case detectives reconstructed the timeline once more. Eliza took final exams on December 16, worked at the campus library until December 20, and attended a student Christmas party the same weekend. Records showed Carlisle also attended but left early, citing a long drive. In 2000, that detail was accepted without challenge. In 2019, investigators tracked down photographs from the student event posted years later on alumni digital archives. Carlisle was visible in multiple shots, staying well past midnight, eliminating the claim of an early departure. The discrepancy prompted re-interview. By then, Carlisle was in his mid-40s, living near Dayton, married with 2 children and working in automotive logistics. Detectives approached with standard courtesy, requesting clarification on the old timeline. Carlisle complied, quiet but composed, acknowledging the inaccuracy. He explained that memory fades, insisting he did not recall exactly when he left. He affirmed that he cared deeply for Eliza, had once hoped to date her, but accepted her preference to remain friends. Emotional truth, however, was rarely singular in missing person examinations. Investigators applied a renewed forensic approach to all stored materials. Tape from her apartment doorframe retained faint touch DNA, a pattern suggesting recent entry by someone known to her rather than forced intrusion. In her closet, preserved articles were reanalyzed, and one wool scarf held trace residue of men's cologne not belonging to her family. Dating advertisements from the late 1990s marketed that cologne as a popular Christmas season gift among young professionals. Purchase records from that era were long inaccessible, but personal credit statements from Carlisle's archived bank records, protected during a separate financial audit, showed that he had purchased that very brand at a downtown department store in the week before Christmas 1999. When confronted with the composite evidence, DNA, timeline discrepancy, personal fragrance match, Carlisle requested counsel. His attorney arranged a voluntary written statement. The statement was neither dramatic nor emotional. It explained that he had visited Eliza on Christmas Eve to deliver the holiday card and a wrapped gift, hopping to speak privately. He claimed that she was polite but firm, thanking him and reiterating that she valued him strictly as a friend. He wrote that he left quietly, drove across the river, and attempted to enjoy the family gathering. He denied any harm or further contact. Despite no clear cause of disappearance in his account, the admission shifted the case status. Carlisle had been the last confirmed person to see her alive. Renewed media coverage, timed with Christmas 2020 retrospectives, aired the unresolved question of a young woman vanishing at the height of the holiday season, and the friend who confessed his unannounced visit only after forensic prompts decades later. In early 2021, a development emerged from property records near the old building. Land behind the apartment complex, an unused parcel slated for expansion, had been excavated for frost line assessment. Cadaver detection technology and ground-penetrating radar flagged an anomaly. Soil samples were extracted, revealing personal items belonging to Eliza, a silver bracelet with engraved initials, documented in her belongings list, and a partial set of keys. Forensic soil analysis estimated placement within a narrow window corresponding to the week of Christmas 1999. Though no full remains were located, the legal threshold shifted. The discovery established that she did not leave voluntarily and that efforts had been made to obscure her location. Prosecutors, cautious but persistent, convened a grand jury in late autumn 2021. The evidentiary mosaic, undisclosed visit, DNA on card, glitter transfer, cologne match, timeline falsehood, and post-event concealment formed a foundation for indictment. Carlisle was charged with manslaughter under Ohio law, based on circumstantial but cohesive forensic reconstruction. Facing mounting evidence, he accepted a plea agreement in December 2022, receiving a 15-year sentence with eligibility for review contingent on continued cooperation. The Hart family, now in their 70s, attended the hearing days before Christmas. The courtroom wreaths and winter garlands did little to soften the proceedings. Their quiet presence reflected decades of waiting, winter after winter, watching lights go up across Cincinnati while their daughter's absence remained unlit. The resolution held no celebration, only a measured closing of a season that never ended for them. The sentencing did not erase the 20 years of winter uncertainty that had accumulated from one Christmas to the next, but it finally provided legal language to replace the family's annual vigil. The prosecutor's summary, delivered without flourish, emphasized procedural closure rather than emotional relief. Evidence had been preserved, rediscovered, retested, and lawfully interpreted. The system moved slowly, sometimes painfully, but it had moved, and that movement carried the case from a December disappearance in 1999 to a December conviction more than 2 decades later. Cincinnati reporters noted the seasonal symmetry with restraint, careful not to tilt the tone toward sentiment. The coverage focused on forensic evolution, cold case diligence, and the quiet confession from a friend who had waited too long to say he had been the last to see her alive. Public record archives show that the initial months after Eliza vanished were defined by sidewalks covered in hard ice, community donation barrels filled for holiday food drives, and a January thaw that briefly exposed, then refroze, any trace along the wooded edges behind the apartment complex. Early interviews reflected normal student rhythms: exams, coffee shops near campus, late-night study sessions, and the soft glow of Christmas lights in rental windows. No witness had reported fear, conflict, or argument between Eliza and anyone in her circle. That absence of visible threat helped obscure the case from sharper investigative focus. Carlisle's closeness to her made him an expected presence in interviews, someone who shared courses, holiday gatherings, and end-of-semester library tables. In 1999, investigators noted no contradictions beyond that initial claim of early departure from the student party. Friends, instructors, and neighbors described him as responsible, mild, and generous during Thanksgiving potlucks. The season itself, with its layered social obligations and overlapping celebrations, allowed for multiple movements without scrutiny. A December night visit did not seem unusual. It was simply buried in the swirl of holiday customs. As cold case detectives reconstructed events decades later, they mapped December 24 hour by hour. Bank camera timestamps confirmed Carlisle leaving downtown after purchasing the cologne and holiday wrapping ribbon. Store lights reflected on icy pavement, and river air moved in cold gusts down Vine Street. The mall had played continuous holiday music until closing, and receipts placed him there in the evening. From there, His travel log ended until reappearing on photographs from the student party that same night. Analysts layered the timeline against Eliza's known movements. Library shift ending on December 20, meal with friends on the 22nd, gift exchange on the 23rd. Christmas Eve held no scheduled obligations until her expected departure for her parents' home. What 2019 forensic reevaluation achieved, more than any interview recollection, was the precise linking of materials overlooked or technologically inaccessible in 1999. Glitter transfer on the envelope flap, initially cataloged as visual holiday residue, became molecular evidence under modern lab instruments. Its sourcing to a specific artificial pine variety, mass-produced with distinct metallic binding compounds in a narrow 2-year period, confirmed the envelope had been sealed inside her decorated apartment, not elsewhere. Combined with Carlisle's DNA, it established presence in a private holiday context at a time when he claimed distance. This material intersection transformed a friendly gesture description into a verified encounter. In Cincinnati's courthouse basement, rows of metal shelves house decades of case files. Winter air circulates through vents with metallic hum. Research into neighboring cold cases shows that breakthroughs often occur through procedural persistence rather than sudden revelation. In Eliza's case, it was the building leak, the trunk discovery, and the willingness to retest an envelope that turned inertia into motion. The lead detective in 2000, since retired, expressed quiet regret in a written statement to investigators, noting that the volume of holiday-related calls, missing person reports due to travel, and limited laboratory slots forced prioritization. The envelope had not appeared crucial then. In 2021, under fluorescent lab lighting, it became foundational. Audio logs of Carlisle's final interview phase, transcribed without emotional markers, describe a tone of exhaustion. He acknowledged proximity, memory lapses, and disappointment over unreciprocated affection, but denied physical confrontation or intent. His legal team argued in pretrial sessions that absence of remains prevented conclusive reconstruction. However, Ohio precedent allowed circumstantial synthesis when supported by physical placement evidence, timeline falsification, and forensic microtrace alignment. The plea agreement, structured to avoid a protracted trial, conceded responsibility for concealment and unreported discovery of a deceased person, categorized under manslaughter statutes rather than homicide enhancements. December sentencing coincided with a year defined by civic restraint. Pandemic-era protocols limited courtroom attendance. Family pews spaced apart under wreaths offered dignified stillness. Winter sunlight through tall windows struck the polished floor in narrow bands. When the judge read the terms, Eliza's family did not speak, gesture, or turn. They had waited 23 Christmas Eves without knowing her final hours, and the legal outcome, while definitive, could not fill the unlit chair kept at their annual holiday table. The aftermath entered city record in simple municipal language: cold case resolution, plea accepted, sentencing logged. Seasonal editorial columns referenced the case briefly, noting the slow machinery of justice. Local broadcasters aired segments recounting the campus era of the late 1990s, before cell towers, before routine digital check-ins, before algorithms tracked presence across holiday nights. Photographs of Clifton Avenue in snowfall, of storefront Santas ringing bells, of Ohio River ice sheets moving toward the horizon, created context rather than embellishment. They framed a period where a young woman could vanish between Christmas carols and late-night gift wrapping, leaving only handwritten notes and fiber traces behind. Post-conviction procedures included transfer of Carlisle to a state facility, psychological evaluation, and record sealing of certain witness statements. He will be eligible for review under conditions of continued cooperation, though the Hart family has expressed no interest in future hearings. Their public statement, issued through a family liaison, contained no commentary on motives or forgiveness. It simply thanked the cold case unit for persistence and closed with a seasonal sentiment not of celebration but of rest. Each December, they still hang her ornament on their modest pine tree in the West Side home where she grew up, the lights reflecting soft gold across framed winter photographs. The Cincinnati winter of the final closure year ended in standard Midwestern fashion: gray skis, salted roads, and river fog sweeping through downtown arches. Flyers that once bore Eliza's portrait have long since faded, but departmental archives preserve the original prints: blue coat, tan scarf, understated smile. They remain filed among countless cases, a reminder of the distance between disappearance and resolution. The procedural path from a sealed trunk to a courtroom verdict proves neither fast nor forgiving, but it stands as documentation of detail, patience, and lawful accountability. In the end, the friend who confessed too late did speak, not impulsively or dramatically, but through tested fibers, corrected timelines, and a winter plea that closed a Christmas absence that had stretched across 23 silent seasons. The years following the conviction settled into a muted rhythm in Cincinnati, the kind recognizable to anyone who has lived long enough to see a city's season cycle, while a single unresolved memory sits unchanged. Winter salt continued to mark the pavement on Queen City Avenue. The streetlights still flickered in the same halogen yellow near the university bus stops, and Clifton's brick apartments held generations of new tenants, none of whom carried any awareness of the December absence that once defined the building's basement. The storage trunk, now cataloged and sealed under new chain of custody documentation, became part of a modern archival system, its contents preserved not for potential future prosecution, but for historical integrity. The case had been legally concluded, but evidentiary stewardship remained a duty of the department, particularly in a city with an aging backlog of late 1990s files. Eliza's disappearance had originally been processed in an era before DNA indexing systems expanded, before cold case software integrated cross-county mapping, and before trace analytics could extract full profiles from microscopic holiday glitter. That era's technological limits did not represent negligence, only the natural constraint of tools available at the time. The 2019 rediscovery allowed investigators to reconcile 2 decades of gaps using modern comparative instruments. Every fiber sample, envelope flap, and picture negative was logged into a digital catalog, ensuring that any future forensic review, should standards evolve further, could access clean, well-documented chain records. Cold case divisions across the Midwest occasionally use Eliza's file as a procedural model, not for the tragedy of its timeline, but for the quiet rigor of its reactivation. Cincinnati's winter atmosphere continues shaping the ways residents remember difficult cases. December historically brings increased reports of missing individuals due to interstate travel, weather delays, and family stressors. In 1999, those seasonal factors blended with holiday obligations to obscure the early hours of Eliza's disappearance. In 2022, the case's resolution served as a cautionary archive for detectives newly assigned to holiday period investigations. Training seminars highlight her timeline as an example: a young adult with no risk markers, no visible conflict, and no pattern of avoidance could still vanish without immediate alarm, because the calendar itself provided plausible explanations. Family gatherings, winter driving conditions, Late-night church services and New Year visitation traditions mask absences in ways that summer months do not. Carlisle's post-conviction evaluation show an uneventful adjustment to state supervision. Records note consistent adherence to facility guidelines, limited communication with the outside world beyond approved family contacts, and participation in psychological assessments centered on unresolved grief and boundary fixation. Reports stop short of labeling motive, focusing instead on behavioral patterns from the late 1990s that indicated dependency on specific interpersonal reassurance, particularly during winter academic breaks when student schedules fragmented. In testimony sealed for privacy, mental health notes reference seasonal affective shifts typical in Midwestern university populations, isolation in December, heightened sentimentality linked to holiday rituals, and magnification of perceived emotional losses. None of this served as legal justification, only explanatory context. The judicial outcome relied not on motive but on verifiable timeline reconstruction and concealment evidence. Cincinnati media, after briefly revisiting the case during anniversary segments, allowed it to return to archival quiet. Newspapers published one final summary referencing improved cold case infrastructure, upgraded basement storage, climate-controlled evidence rooms, and digital conversion of handwritten logs. The police department's annual winter report included a chapter on forensic backlog reduction, citing Eliza's case as an example of why abandoned files must be systematically reviewed. The building where the trunk had been found underwent further improvements, with basement access monitored through secure digital entry rather than loose-key landlord systems. Student tenants, unaware of the building's past, posted seasonal decorations on doors, small LED wreaths replacing the artificial pine strands that once shed glitter across envelopes. The Hart family remained mostly private. From county records, one finds that they requested no victim impact speeches at parole hearings, no involvement in media reenactments, and no participation in national missing person panels. Their response to closure reflected the temperament of individuals who had aged alongside unanswered winters. They preferred the finality of legal record over the repetition of public remembrance. Each December, one floral bouquet was placed at the base of the church nativity in their parish, unmarked, in proximity to the poinsettias and candle-lit choir stands. Parish volunteers, unaware of its significance, simply incorporated it into seasonal arrangements. By 2024, the case existed primarily as a training document. New detectives studying procedural history read about the Christmas Eve timeline, the trunk behind damp drywall, and the cards sealed with glitter and quiet expectation. They learned how digital alumni archives revealed Carlisle's continued presence at the student party long after he claimed to have left. They studied the soil analysis reports, which dated bracelet and key placement to the freeze-thaw cycle of late December 1999. They reviewed photographs of the excavation site near the old parking lot, where winter frost still forms crystalline crusts at dawn. The case offered no sensational narrative, only a demonstration that absence, when examined under evolving tools, eventually constructs presence. The winter landscape of the city did not soften because of the resolution. Around Christmas each year, downtown fountains are shut off and wrapped against freeze, street musicians shift indoors, and university dormitories empty. These rhythms are unchanged from the late 1990s. Clifton coffee shops still hang white lights in their windows, their reflections quivering on damp sidewalks when sleet arrives. Campus libraries still thin out after finals, their final patrons stepping into December air with arms full of textbooks and gift bags destined for family homes. In this quiet seasonal ritual, Eliza's last recorded week remains recognizably modern. Errands, volunteer plans, holiday notes written in red marker, and one unscheduled visit buried in the swirl of year's end. Forensic analysts who handled the 2019 retesting note that technology will continue evolving, perhaps revealing even finer detail if samples remain preserved. Yet in this case, further analysis is unnecessary. The legal system has delivered its conclusion, and additional examination would only refine an already complete understanding. Chain of custody logs show stable storage, humidity control, and long-term archiving procedures designed to preserve evidence without anticipating use. This is a common aftereffect in cold case resolution, the retention of items that no longer serve prosecutorial function, but remain as witnesses to investigative progression. The house where Eliza grew up has undergone minimal change. Property assessment photography shows the same modest pine at the front window, the same narrow walkway where December snow accumulates unevenly along brick edges. Neighbors have rotated, but the structure remains intact. Inside, framed photographs document a young woman whose presence is frozen at 22. Knitted scarf, campus courtyard backdrop, early winter sunlight catching strands of hair. Time continued, but the portrait remains anchored in pre-digital clarity. The Cincinnati skyline, visible across the river near the suspension bridge, continues to host winter fog each dawn. Barges move slowly beneath ice-gray horizons, and holiday markets still emerge in late November with rows of handmade crafts and spiced cider. In these annual scenes, nothing publicly marks the absence that shaped one family's decades. The city absorbs memory the way river fog absorbs streetlight, indistinct, unannounced, continuous. Eliza's case does not appear in tourist guides or seasonal broadcasts. It lives in courthouse ledgers, archived storage, and the quiet interior of a family home where one ornament continues to hang, lit by soft gold. The final chapter of any solved cold case, especially one rooted in a holiday disappearance, tends to hold less narrative climax than administrative closure. Cincinnati's records show that after the sentencing, and after the final winter news cycle receded, the city returned to its routine of December logistics, plowing routes, riverfront lighting schedules, and campus safety reminders. Eliza Hart's name moved from active rotation in cold case briefings to the quiet ledger reserved for concluded files. In that ledger, she sits alphabetically among others whose disappearances eventually yielded answers, even if the answers arrived too late to restore the lives that once expected ordinary winters, predictable gatherings, and unremarkable holidays. The district evidence custodian, in annual reports submitted without decorative language, documented that all materials related to the 1999 disappearance are permanently secured in climate-regulated storage. Holiday linens, once folded above the evidence box in the trunk, are preserved as non-essential artifacts simply because their placement formed part of the chronology. The trunk itself, a mundane commercial storage piece with tarnished brass hardware, is tagged not as a personal belonging but as a spatial element that evidenced concealment. Cold case trainings in 2024 referenced it not as a dramatic container of truth, but as a reminder that overlooked basements, sealed crawl spaces, and mislabeled storage units often hold procedural answers. The December leak that revealed it was never considered symbolic, only infrastructural coincidence. Carlisle's plea, filed without courtroom spectacle, remains the legal endpoint. In state custody, his role has transitioned from subject of inquiry to subject of routine behavioral evaluation. Records indicate regular participation in mandated counseling, standardized work assignments, and a classification rating typical for non-disruptive inmates with historical interpersonal offenses. Parole review will not occur for several years, and even then, the conditions for release require continuous acknowledgement of responsibility. In psychological notation, examiners refrain from overinterpreting motive, instead marking the case as one of unreported discovery, emotional fixation, and subsequent concealment during a holiday period, when absence could be mistaken for travel, fatigue, or winter retreat. The Hart family, whose voices defined the early vigils, no longer participates in public commentary. Their final written statement after sentencing held no dramatic summarization, simply a line acknowledging that Christmas will arrive each year without restoration, and that certainty, even delayed, is preferable to indefinite wondering. Regional reporters honored the withdrawn stance, choosing not to request interviews or follow-up reflections in subsequent Decembers. Their home, still modestly decorated each winter, remains outside the pattern of media visitation. Census updates show stability rather than movement. They did not relocate after closure, nor seek refuge in anonymity. Their lives continued along the same street, beneath the same winter rooflines, carrying the same routine of hanging her ornament each year in quiet continuity. Cincinnati's winter landscape, though never altered by the outcome, became the visual frame through which retrospective reflection occasionally surfaces. Patrons ordering hot drinks in Clifton coffee shops may notice old photographs hung for seasonal decor, vintage campus snowscapes, river ice flows, and midtown holiday street scenes from the late 1990s. None of these images were taken with Eliza's case in mind, yet they capture the environment in which she lived her final recorded days. The humid cold that coats downtown masonry, the way winter sun sets early along the industrial river, the muted sound of traffic beneath garland-wrapped streetlights, these remain constant. Routine erases nothing but repeats everything. Local detectives, asked during training conferences about the case's defining element, typically cite not the emotional resonance but the procedural patience. It was the patient re-examination of low-interest evidence, the greeting envelope, the glitter transfer, the building storage records, that shifted the investigation from vanished person stalemate to verified encounter. In documentation submitted to the State Forensic Association, the case appears as a demonstration that absence alone does not indicate unsolvable narrative. Absence becomes structure when layered with digital archives, corrected alibis, and microtrace technologies not available at the time of initial inquiry. The holiday context, once treated as background noise, became essential. Christmas Eve provided a window during which visits were socially normal, tracking was intermittent, and silence could be excused without suspicion. For younger detectives, the case functions less as crime instruction and more as archival discipline. They are encouraged to walk through old buildings, review mislabeled inventory closets, and rescan handwritten logs stored before digitization. Many solved cold cases do not emerge from confessions, but from overlooked corners where time and storage intersect. In Eliza's file, aging handwriting in blue ink on a holiday envelope carried more evidentiary weight than any spoken recollection. The forensic era that followed mined that handwriting for DNA, fiber adhesion, and seasonal material composition. What once appeared festive became analytical. The artificial pine glitter, a product of late 1990's manufacturing, turned from decoration into timestamp. In the years since closure, Cincinnati's Cold Case Division expanded its December protocols. Investigators cross-reference holiday travel reports earlier, confirm unannounced visits more thoroughly, and treat seasonally contextualized disappearances with less automatic leniency. None of these policy adjustments are publicly advertised. They exist in internal memoranda and procedural adjustments that affect only those who work in winter evidence rooms. City residents will never notice the shift unless they become entangled in a timeline, requiring similar re-examination decades later. The apartment complex where the trunk was found now houses students who carry no memory of the investigation. Their December routines consist of streaming movies, final exams, and late-night drives to grocery stores before winter break. Basement access requires coded entry, and landlords maintain stricter cataloging of stored materials. The walls where moisture once seeped are sealed, newly insulated, and painted in neutral tones. The space no longer resembles the dim, dust-layered chamber where investigators first encountered the trunk and lifted its lid under halogen inspection lamps. Yet, even without visible trace, the building remains part of the case's geography, fixed, unchanged in legal record. When winter approaches each year, the city follows its standard operations. River traffic shifts to ice watch, university shuttle routes thin, and neighborhoods place electric candles in windows. In these small repetitions, the memory of a young woman who never reached her Christmas Eve dinner persists not through public testimony but through private acknowledgement. She is not invoked in seasonal broadcasts, nor attached to memorial plaques. Instead, she remains present through the procedural legacy she inadvertently created, a reminder that winter absences require scrutiny, that stored boxes deserve reopening, and that handwritten Christmas cards may contain more than sentiment. That is the quiet aftermath, a city continuing its December cycles, a family closing their curtains each holiday night, and an evidence trunk resting in controlled preservation. The result of the case is not dramatic restoration or cathartic narrative but lawful finality. In a season defined by repetition, carols, wreaths, snowfall, midnight services, Eliza's story now exists as one resolved entry among many. Her final winter remains documented, her absence no longer open-ended, her presence sustained only by archive, record, and the annual act of remembrance performed without audience.